Hi. Firstly, I'd just like to thank you, Mark, as well as Cindy of 8 O'Clock Club and Moyo Heart Center for the opportunity to present. And I would also very much like to thank all of you, because I know in this time that is very confusing and that can be quite overwhelming as far as what's coming up and the uncertainty that surrounds us, that technology demands a heck of a lot from us. So I really appreciate you giving me the airtime this evening, when I'm sure it's easier to sit with a family or have a glass of wine or watch something on Netflix or read a good book. So thank you very much for your time. I really, really appreciate it. I'm going to get straight into my presentation. Today, this evening, what I'd really like to do is just to convince you of the importance and the power and the impact of fierce compassion, to give you a little insight into this a story behind it, which is my own and a case study that I've brought in, as well as some science that underpins it, and then also lastly, how to basically integrate these into your life and how fascinating well-being and health can be, especially in a moment in time now when things are just quite bizarre. They really are bizarre. So I think the need for us globally at the moment is really to bring a little bit of self-compassion into our lives, because what we're going through right now seems very symptomatic and very familiar for me around the cancer journey that I went through. So I hope what I'm going to present to you this evening will give you some good value. So what I'm going to start off. So I'm going to speak about health and well-being essentially, and how compassion is the foundation of that mental and emotional wellness and well-being, and how powerful that is actually in resulting in our physical level of health or dis-ease. So a lot of what I'm going to present to you are other people's research studies, findings, science, but I'm going to basically present through my own subjective experience of cancer, of what well-being means to me, what health means to me, how the application of self-compassion and fierce compassion at that has really shifted everything in my life, and how powerful it can be. So to start off with, how compassion works in my world is the more compassionate I am with myself, the more compassion I have with my partner, with my family, with my friends, with my community. The more judgmental I am towards myself, the more I start to see myself judging other people and judging other communities. So the more self-compassion that I believe we can give to ourselves is essentially what we're able to actually impact the world in. So if we are non-judgmental and kind to ourselves, we're able to be that for the world and for other people. So I in my hippie side, believe that it's really the biggest and the most important thing, especially at the moment now, in this time of what feels like a huge amount of grief that we've entered as a globe. So that's my definition essentially of compassion, and that lends itself to what I'm going to be speaking about during the course of this presentation. The sobering statistics is the next one that I've got left. And this is the only challenging stat that I'm going to give you this evening. Everything has got a lot of hope in it, a lot of science that supports that hope, and a lot of proof that these pillars that I'm going to present to you tonight, these themes, have a huge impact physiologically, mentally, emotionally, and to our physical health as well. So this sobering stat is, and I come from the cancer side of things, my journey or my awakening or my connection to this work has come through the challenge, the trauma, and the growth and the gift that's been in a cancer journey. And cancer before this pandemic it has been a growing highlight and not spoken to a lot. 13 years ago when I got cancer, I was quite special. Now if you get cancer, it's so prolific that so many people have got it. And there's a lot of hope that actually that I'm going to speak to around that tonight. So the sobering statistic is, and I got this from Zach Bush, MD. It's a very credible source. I'm very happy to share the source with you. But essentially, if you were born in the year 1900, your chances of getting cancer were 1 in 20. If you were born in 1940, your chances were 1 in 16. If you were born in 1970, your chances of getting cancer were 1 in 10. And now if you're an American male born today in the States, you have a 50% chance of getting cancer. And that exponential curve speaks greatly to the advancement, essentially, of our human species. And you'll understand in going through these pillars or these themes and where they come from, how powerful we are to be able to kind of dislodge or unhinge that statistic. And the reason I say that with absolute confidence is that there is another stat, and that at the moment, it's kind of between 80 and 95% chance, or the source of getting cancer at the moment is kind of four different things. The first one is environmental toxins. These are things that we have a certain level of control, but not fully. And these are essentially chemicals that surround us in our food and our water and things like that. The next thing is stress, our relationship to stress. It's not essentially stress itself, but it's how we relate to stress. So stress is essentially not bad or not good, but it's how we relate to the overwhelm of stress that we've currently got in the situation, and if we live there or not. Then there's the nutritional density of our food. So we typically are eating 60% of the nutritional density that our grandparents ate in the food that they ate. So there's a huge awareness around what we can do now that can increase the nutritional density of the food, and the nutritional, basically, the foundation of our bodies, because essentially what we eat today, it becomes the bodies of tomorrow. And then lastly is our lifestyle choices. So everything that I'm going to go through tonight essentially feeds into these four things. The stats around us getting cancer can be really changed by looking into what actually enhances our well-being, what enhances our health. And all of it is underpinned by, for me, a fierce level of self-compassion. So the foundation of the work, I'll speak to three big contributors at the moment. So the first one is an amazing study book course by a woman named Dr. Kelly Turner, who basically did a research study that yielded spontaneous remission, or radical remission, as she calls it. So she was like me, a counselor and a guide and a support for those people going through the cancer journey. And she found all of these spontaneous remission cases, and she found them in very credible research portals like PubMed. She then found 1, she found 5, she found 10, and she continued to find a huge amount of these people who had had a terminal cancer diagnosis. And for some reason, years after that, were completely clear of cancer. So the doctors and the Western medicines and the stats have said to them that their prognosis was poor, that they were going to pass. And she went and studied over 1,500 of these people and asked them what they did in order to be able to heal themselves. And her book has essentially got these 10 pillars. And what she does, which is really amazing, is she's gone and found other experts and other studies and other science that supports these pillars, and then use those to explain essentially these pillars from a scientific and a research basis. It should be taught in schools. It's really been probably one of the most profound last 4 or 5 years of my life in discovering this content. Then the next one is the Blue Zone work by a gentleman named Dan Buettner, who was funded by the National Geographic to find a location or locations in the world where people lived the longest. So they lived past 100, they lived fulfilling lives. When they ended up passing, then they ended up doing it quite quickly, but very healthy. So these are called Blue Zones, and they've been studied now for 15 years. So if you take radical remission pillars and you overlay them onto Blue Zone themes, they're almost absolutely identical. And I'm going to basically present this evening around these pillars and how surprising and not surprising all at the same time, but also how simple actually it is to apply them to your life. So these are the 10 primary themes that I'm going to speak to, and which is my foundation for fierce compassion and all the work that I do with cancer patients. So I'm going to start off with, so I typically have 1 or 2 of these case studies that are searchable, that are prominent, that if you merely type in, and this one's a good example, mindset matters, exercise, and the placebo effect. So if you were to put that into Google, you'd find a number of places where this paper has been released. And the reason why I do that is because I want you to be able to, I don't want you to take my word verbatim. This is my experience and the information that I've found. And as I mentioned before, this is other people's work, but it's incredibly powerful what these studies are telling us. So just to give you an indication of how powerful our emotional and mental states of being are, I'm just going to give you a quick walkthrough of this pilot or this placebo trial. So two gentlemen, AJ Crum and EJ Langer, essentially did a study that was called Mindset Matters, Exercise and the Placebo. And essentially what they did was they got on board 48 chambermaids across 2 hotels. And the reason why they picked these chambermaids was that the chambermaids were ignorant of the fact that during their work days, when they cleaned rooms and they got them ready for guests, they were doing far more than the 30 minutes per day that the American Surgeon General recommends that people do as far as being healthy and balancing exercise. So they did a lot more than 30 minutes, and they were very unaware of it. So that was the key, being unaware. So they then split them into 2 groups. And the first group, they basically educated, or they explained that in their everyday work, they were actually exercising and burning calories that were equivalent to more than an hour and a half's worth of concentrated exercise. The second group, they did not educate. So they kept that as the control group. And they did this for 30 days. And the observation was that the first group that were told around the exercise being, or their work being an hour and a half worth of exercise, had lost 2 pounds of body fat during the course of that 30-day period. And the control group had no change. So as fascinating, interesting, and maybe a stretch as this is to absorb, the placebo effect is a very real effect. There's a reason why the pharmaceutical companies have gone from single blind, which is the participants not knowing if they're having the active drug or the placebo, to double blind, which is the medical practitioners now not knowing who's on what, either the drug or the placebo, to now the standard is triple blind. So, and the triple blind means that the person who's actually researching and analyzing the data doesn't know who's in it, just so that their influence doesn't go through into the trial. So that's how powerful the placebo effect is, that every single drug that has ever been produced has to go through these trials because of how powerful they are. So there needs to be essentially a conditioning, so a belief system basically applied, like with the first group. Expectation needs to be set that they are doing exercise, and meaning applied to that, which means that essentially that exercise is good for them and this is actually a health benefit. So all those 3 and the placebo effect kicks in. So I just wanted to kind of set the tone of the next themes that I'm going to be talking into. But let me get to this. So my name is Brett William Simpson. Essentially, I'm a coach. I'm a cancer survivor. And I went through cancer myself, and it was probably one of the most profound experiences at the time. It was very tough. It was overwhelming. I went through a lot and faced a heck of a lot of demons, but asked some very powerful internal questions. And subsequent to that, and now I think it's probably the biggest gift that I've ever gone through. So I had 4 misdiagnoses. Doctors are not perfect. More than often than not, they're really trying to do the best thing that they can. And what is significant about that is that I was a real boy's boy and didn't really pay much attention to the sore that was on my lip, because that's essentially where the cancer started. And it was hurting, and I kept on toughing it out. And eventually it was my partner at the time who dragged me to the doctor and finally got diagnosed with cancer. So it was caught very late. I ended up having a third of my lip cut out, and then we thought that was clear. And then we found that there was a hard lymph node in the right, in my neck in the right-hand side. And it was discovered that the cancer had spread into my lymphatic system. So I had what was called a bilateral neck dissection, which is cutting me from ear to ear across my neck, and then down to the top of my nipples, essentially. And everything that was connected to my lymphatic system was pulled out. So anything connected was taken out. The gift for me came with 4 most unbelievable, empathic, kind medical practitioners, really amazing doctors. And they gifted me this thing, belief, which I'm going to speak into now. Because the biggest tipping point in my life happened 3 years after, in 2010. So I got diagnosed and had all my treatments in 2007. And in 2010, I went to an amazing doctor who did the surgery, Dr. Andrew Bruce Schwartz, Dr. ABC affectionately. He is a lovely man, very empathic, sweet, very, very kind. And I'd taken him this big bouquet of flowers, and a card, and the card said, "Thank you for saving my life." And it was very meaningful for the both of us. So I got a little bit kind of emotional, and so did he, and he dropped his defenses. And he said to me a comment that I'll never forget. He said to me, "Brett, we told you had a Chihuahua where you actually had the most aggressive Rottweiler we've ever seen." And it just, that spun me completely. And I said, "Please explain what you mean." So he said, "We didn't think you were going to make it." And at the time, actually, all of the doctors told me that I had a 95% chance of making it because I asked for that stat. I'd watched too many American movies. So I got that stat that I was going to be okay. 95 is a good percentage to anchor into. And then I subsequently lived 3 years later, and I went to each one of my doctors, and they told me the same thing. They told me that in their experience, people who tend, they're going to believe with every ounce inside of them, that they tend to be the people who believe, and the people who tend not to believe tend to the people who pass. And I thought this was all rubbish and esoteric and crazy. And then I discovered a science called psychoneuroimmunology. And what that essentially means is that your mental state of intent with your emotional state of feeling, where those two combine, where they join, your body actually secretes different hormones with a different level of thought and different level of feeling. So what I realized then was that I'm actually the pharmacist. I'm actually the one who goes and picks the drugs or the hormones through my DNA of what I want in my system, in my blood system, in my lymph system, in my cells. So essentially, I'm in control of what hormones or drugs that are in my system that I can activate. And that was absolutely life-changing for me. And this is why I do this work. This is why this has become incredibly important to me to share this, because it's we should be taught this at school, that our thinking and our feeling has a huge impact on our physical health. It has a massive impact on our mental and emotional well-being. And it literally programs our bodies to either thrive or to fall out of ease and into possible dis-ease. So I'm going to now take you through the things that have been revolutionary for me, that I've taken from different people that have really fit into this theme that I'm speaking in tonight of fierce compassion. So I discovered the Enneagram, which is, for lack of a better phrase, because it's not, but a personality profiling tool. So it's ancient. Enneagram is actually Greek for Ennea, meaning 9, and gram meaning written or spoken word. It's in Judaism, Sufism, Christianity. It's in ancient science. It's in ancient maths. If you speak to the esoterics, the aliens gave it to us. If you speak to the Christians, God gave it to us. It's really, really powerful. And the reason why I really buy into it is because it's helped me understand how I've created my personality in this life. It's helped me understand why I think, feel, and act in the way that I do. And it helps me take ownership of that. And the greatest gift for me through utilizing this Enneagram has been to help me own my superpower. So I'm a 9 Enneagram, which means I'm an adaptive peacemaker. I'm easygoing. I make friends very easily. I'm a great mediator. I can connect people. I can more easily step into somebody else's shoes than most others. But I'm also very challenged by conflict. I can be a sloth. I can fall on addictions or numbing. And when I started to unpack or understand that my superpower or my strengths are mine to own, I was able to step into that. But more so, and probably the most important thing that I'd like to kind of to put across tonight, especially that what feels like we're all going through this real familiar grief cycle that I went through when I went through my cancer. And that is to be really kind with the things that we struggle with our shadow, with when we show up poorly, when we don't add value. So what I'm now able to do is to give myself a lot of kindness around the things that I've struggled with my whole life, that I know are going to be a lifetime's worth of stretching and playing with and exploring in order to heal those spaces. So my level of self-acceptance has just grown and grown and grown. And the gift is from the Enneagram, because it's helped me understand and own every aspect of myself so that I'm actually able to accept who I am. And it is one of the most powerful things. And as I go through the next slide, you'll understand how it affects the autonomic nervous system. So if any of you have ever done the Enneagram, I really implore you to take a squiz at it again. For those who don't know, do a little bit of homework. It's incredible. It's really fascinating, and it just gives you a lot of peace around who you are. Yeah, it's just extremely powerful. The next thing I'd like to get into is, which is a big proponent of radical remission, as well as blue zone work, and a huge amount of data in positive psychology. The website positivepsychology.com has a massive amount of science and research and incredible case studies behind gratitude and how powerful gratitude can actually be, because we can't be in a grateful place and a fearful place at the same time. Our autonomic nervous system won't allow us to be, there's no gray areas there, there's black and white. So when we in gratitude, we're not in fear. And when we're in gratitude, we start to activate all the right hormones within ourselves. So essentially, gratitude can rewire the brain. It alters the hormones that we put into our system, which in effect will ultimately, repetitively, if we are more and more grateful and we focus on gratitude, we actually move into staying in our parasympathetic state. So the body has this autonomic nervous system, and the autonomic nervous system has essentially two different modes, let's say. So the sympathetic nervous system is flight, fright, or freeze. And this is associated with cortisol, adrenaline, and 1,600 other stress hormones. When we're in that state, we actually foster an environment within ourselves that creates a perfect environment for cancer to grow or for disease to start rising. When we are in our parasympathetic state, we are in rest, digest, and heal. And when we're in that place, we have a peacefulness about us. We're connected to, let's say, somebody who we love, or a puppy, or a good thought, or something beautiful. And gratitude moves us from our sympathetic state, which we all seem to be in at the moment, and going into this massive struggle of anxiety and fear and grief and sadness of what's passing, and uncertainty of what's coming. And we move into a place of our parasympathetic, which gives us gratitude, which focuses us on things that we have in our lives that we can be grateful for. And I know it can be very hard, and I have usually a lot of challenges when I speak into this pillar for people going through cancer, because you can imagine when you go through something as tough and as traumatic as cancer, how hard it is when somebody in your face says to you, okay, what can you be grateful for? And often I get this astounded look, and a flinch, almost like as if they're going to punch me in the stomach or something, because it's extremely hard. But a constant and small focus on gratitudes that you have actually scientifically can actually change your health, change your well-being, reduce stress. It's phenomenal, the studies that explain this. And there's one kind of cute little case study around 180 nuns. They filled out, or they wrote a long letter actually, when they went into, and I'm not too sure if it's a nunnery the nuns go into, but I think it's a nunnery. So they went into a nunnery. So it's a perfect controlled study. So in something like a nunnery, and I hope I'm getting this right and not making a fool of myself, essentially they kind of eat the same, they're exposed to the same stresses, the same environmental toxins, the same nutrition. So it's a very good control study. So these 180 nuns wrote an essay of everything of their life up until the point where they entered the life of a nun. And the study was over 50 years. The outcome after 50 years, that they did an analysis of these essays, and they kind of divided the nuns into the positively predisposed, so gratitude, grateful, amazing things in life, and blessed, to negative, problems, I'm anxious, victim mode over here. So they split them into those two. And after this 50-year study, the results were that 90% of the optimistic nuns lived past 85, where only 34 of the more negative side of the letters of those nuns made it past the year 85. And there are huge amounts of studies. If you go to positivepsychology.com and you just type in gratitude, it's astounding. It's you need nothing more to convince you of how powerful this is as a tool. Then food and nutrition. So it's in the blue zones, it's in radical remission. It's proven in positive psychology that what we eat actually influences our perception of life, our optimism. And there's a couple of sacred cows essentially around food, that I've learned from a number of different experts and people that I've worked with internationally and locally. And that is to add more grains, fruit and veg, eat the colors of the rainbow, because there's different nutrients in the different colors, and to reduce meat, to reduce dairy, to reduce or eliminate sugar and processed food. So those essentially are likely unsurprising, but what I really focus on and what is really interesting around Blue Zone and radical remission work is our emotional connections to food. So I'm not too sure. I'd be curious to know if a lot of you, especially at the beginning of this lockdown, ended up eating a lot and comfort eating. So I tended to do that at the beginning. I've got a problem with chips. So I've got a number of bags of chips in my storage, and allow myself in the evening to have a few now, but the urge is there to have a lot more. So essentially what I've realized in my shift in nutrition and my shift in diet is that there are a lot more influences to what I eat than what I think they are. So it's not just about eating the healthier things that I spoke to a little earlier. It's around what are the emotional connections to our food? What are those things that we need to possibly look at and explore and to put a little bit of light on in order for us to be able to shift any sort of behavior? So this is inherently inherited kind of perspectives. I've got certain foods that I kind of go to. Lasagna is a big comfort food of mine. When I'm feeling very stressed, I make myself a nice lasagna. It makes me feel better. What I found around this, there's a huge amount of caution that I put against it, is start where you are and not where the vegan is, or the vegetarian, or the pescatarian, or the person who has a better diet than you, or you're looking to change your diet, but essentially where you are and making tiny, tiny little changes. My experience of this 3 years ago, I went for a hike with a friend who was a vegetarian. And after 5 days of hiking, and because I ate vegetarian with her, and after 5 days, I was like very excited to have a hamburger, and I did. And all I felt like was having a sleep, and my digestive system was totally messed up. And I started for the first time to become aware of how food made me feel, the energy that it took or gave me after that. And since then, it's been these tiny little changes, these minuscule little changes with a huge amount of awareness and no self-judgment that has helped me make shifts. And that is any advice that I'd give around food nutrition, is to meet yourself where you are and just to be gentle with yourself as you're going through it, because it does affect our emotions. It does affect our mental state of being, and it really affects how much we are showing to ourselves. In fact, it's the biggest tool to be able to show ourselves self-compassion, is to eat food that invigorates our bodies as opposed to depletes. The next one is movement. Now, this is in Blue Zone and in radical remission as well. And the science, like I showed you that case study or that research study, but what's fascinating about movement is that this is around natural movement. So it's the hidden exercise. So what a lot of the experts around the cancer or the disease space are starting to speak into is that there's hidden exercise that we're not doing because we've advanced our society. And in South Africa, we've got people who clean our homes, we've got people who mow the lawn, we've got takeaways instead of chopping up vegetables and using up some calories, believe it or not. It's easier for us to be able to plug into modern ease. So we kind of almost eliminating by getting into our car and going to the supermarket rather than going for a walk or a cycle, these hidden exercises that we no longer do. And essentially this is more than enough than we need. It's just making the conscious choice to move in a way that gives our body movement and flexibility, which oxygenates our system. And what's interesting about Blue Zones is that when they speak to exercise, they speak of joyful exercise. So there was this one cool case in it. There was this, I think it was about an 84-year-old guy that he barefoot water ski, and he just absolutely loves it. It's his wind down, it's his stress release, and that's his exercise is his joy. I find I use kite surfing, trail running, and surfing as my movement of choice. And it's the easiest way to force endorphins, to shift you from your sympathetic to your parasympathetic. Because what happens is when you start exercising, you start secreting endorphins, which end up in your system, and then you start feeling better and happier, and your mood escalates because of that. So it's one of the easiest ways to actually shift your mood, is to use movement into doing that. Rest and relaxation. If you have watched Eat, Pray, Love, Elizabeth Gilbert character essentially surrenders to this theme in Italy called dolce faniente, which is the sweetness of doing nothing. And this is something that our modern society has really, and it comes out very strongly in Blue Zone work, is that the restful time that we in our modern era have all but eliminated is allowing ourselves not to do anything, just to relax, to read a book. It's often very hard to give ourselves permission to be able to do that. And in one case, I was very surprised that there were still shepherds in the world, but in Sardinia, Italy, in one of the blue zones, there are shepherds, and they literally live the longest out of all the people, out of all the blue zones in the world. And you can imagine they tend to livestock, they tend to sheep predominantly. So there's a lot of time relaxing, observing. The immune system then goes down from the sympathetic to the parasympathetic. Again, there's that movement the whole time, and every single theme that I'm speaking into, essentially what we're doing is we're moving you from, or me, let me speak for myself, I'm moving myself from my sympathetic state to my parasympathetic, when my body starts to heal, digest, and rest. And rest is a really, really important part of that. The next one is deliberate choice. I've found when I went through my cancer journey, it was very hard for me to pick what surgery to do. I had a number of options, and it was probably the most overwhelming, anxiety-feeding, fence-sitting space that I've ever been in, because I could not make this decision. It was life and death, and it felt like life and death. So what I find that I do, if I don't make a decision, I sit in a level of anxiety until I make that decision. So there's something very, very powerful about making a decision, no matter what that is. But it's about making decisions. And my experience and all the people that I've followed, it's around making those tiny, tiny little decisions. I, in fact, had one patient who I was working with, who was trying to shift and improve decision making. And instead of getting out of the bed on the right-hand side, she got out of the bed on the left-hand side. That was as much of a big decision as she could make. And that small decision allowed her to start making other decisions and other decisions. And that built her confidence in order to make treatment decisions, which are very challenging to make. So it's essentially building a fitness in decision making, and it's very powerful. There's a lot of studies, I think around the 1950s and the 1960s, around A-type personalities to B-type and C-type personalities, which are the decisive decision makers, to the empaths, and the empaths being a little bit more susceptible because of the challenge of the decision making. The next one is following intuition. Now, intuition is a funny thing. And Steve Jobs and Oprah Winfrey and a huge amount of people who are very successful in the business world and I suppose the fame spectrum, for what better a term to use. But essentially, they speak to around going with their gut around decision. And incidentally, we have 100 million neurons in our gut, in our digestive lining. So we actually have 3 brains. We've got one in our head, and then we've got one in our heart. Our heart actually has neurons in it as well as our gut and our stomach. So we actually have 3 brains. And the science that goes on behind this, there's an organization called the HeartMath. It is phenomenal how intelligent and coherent our heart affects basically everything in our autonomic nervous system and our physical health and our mental and emotional well-being. It's really, really powerful. But essentially, this is about making decisions that you can hear that small voice inside of you that goes, this is the right thing. If any of you have been to a kinesiologist, you'll know the body intelligence tests that a kinesiologist will do. They essentially, when anybody who uses the intuition speaks to, how do you listen to it? You can feel it. That's the thing. You can feel it in your body. So does your stomach tighten with the decision, or does it loosen and relax? That's essentially the gut. And this was one of the most prominent ones in radical remission, around listening to their own wisdom, as opposed to friends and loved ones weighing in on decisions, or weighing in on treatments, or weighing in on what they should be doing, the amount of kale they should be eating. So it's essentially very, very powerful to listen to their own voice, which is extremely important, powerful, and amazing studies that go behind it as well. The next one is living in purpose, or on purpose. So this is big in blue zones, and it's massive in radical remission as well. Even in positive psychology, there's a huge amount of studies around this. So in Okinawa, Japan, there's a term that you might have come across called ikigai. So ikigai is essentially a reason to wake up in the morning. So what this means is not necessarily a vocation. So it's not something that somebody pays you money for. It could be a service that you do for a family. Like there's one gentleman in the Blue Zone studies who his job in his 90s, I believe it is, was to fish and get fish every single day for his family. So that was his job or his ikigai, was to get fish and go fishing so that he could contribute to the family. So that was his purpose. My purpose in the morning is making my bed. That's my first purpose. My bigger purpose is doing what I'm doing now and sharing the things that have impacted and given me huge amount of self-compassion in my life. There's another amazing story of a lady who's 102, and she was asked what her ikigai was from Dan Dietner. And basically she said, it's holding her great granddaughter on her lap. And she described it as feeling like jumping into heaven. So that was her ikigai at the age of 102. So it's that meaning, and it doesn't necessarily mean saving the world. It could mean making a beautiful meal for your family, essentially, but very, very powerful. The next one, and the most powerful one at the moment in the space that we're in, for me, is community. And I mean, when we started this, I heard outside the vuvuzelas. I live in Devil's Peak in Cape Town. And as Mark started his intro, I was hearing the applause outside at 8 o'clock in acknowledgement for everyone who's kind of working at the moment when the rest of us are locked down. And community is the most powerful thing I've come across. It's literally the opposite. Connecting to community is literally the opposite of depression. It's in blue zones, it's in radical remissions, it's in positive psychology. The stats are astounding. In fact, in the cancer space, if there were two brothers, twins, same upbringing, same influences in life, one is predisposed positively, the other one is predisposed on the negative side, or has got a huge amount, or is a loner, and the other one has got a community of friends or in family or of loved ones. The person or the brother who has the community will live 50% longer, and that study has been proven time and time again. So community being very, very, very powerful. And in Okinawa, Japan, there's a thing called a moai. And a moai is a social network that you get incorporated into at the age of 5 years old. So when you turn 5, you essentially get grouped and you have a ceremony with, let's say, 5 other 5-year-olds. And you have a ceremony with them, and that becomes your network for the rest of your life. That's your community. That's the people who support you emotionally, mentally, spiritually, and also financially. A lot of the people that Dan Dietner interviewed on this, they would meet actually nightly. So there was a group that he really tickled him, that really kind of got his attention, was a group of ladies that were over 100. And they all met every single night, and apparently they were skinnering around who was really handsome in their village in the 1940s, and just carrying on. But it was around the social fabric and the connection that happens. And there's even amazing progress and adoption of this. Like the NHS in England, as well as it's Ireland and the Netherlands, I believe, have done this thing called social prescribing. So when somebody's going through some sort of healing or treatment program, basically the NHS then pushes them into community-centered initiatives so that they can then hold them from a community perspective. So it's being proven and being implemented very, very powerfully. And I've included PubMed there, which is a very credible evidence-based portal of medical studies and science. And there's a huge amount of influence, impact, and science that sits behind the power of community, which is the most important. I, in fact, had a very interesting experiment that I did with myself, because I often do these 21-day experiences or 90-day experiences and just see if there's any change in doing something. And the one thing was to become aware of how I felt about myself after I'd spent time with a specific person. So it wasn't about them. It wasn't about anything other than how did I feel about myself after I'd spent time with this person or this group of people. And what was fascinating is that just that mere awareness started to shift and change things in my life, change networks. It's made relationships far richer. I've gotten amazing people walk into my life over the last 3 years. Some of the relationships that I thought I might even move away from have actually drawn closer because I start to understand those people a bit better. And I've realized how powerful, good, hearty, kind, inspiring, playful, light people are, and how important it is for me to be able to connect with those. And it's one of the most important things that I work with people who are going through the trauma of a cancer diagnosis. And I'm seeing this like amazing connections happening. This is what I'm really hopeful about, is this sense of community that's starting to happen in everybody's lives around, you know, connecting in these Zoom talks. And I'm having a catch up with all of my mates tomorrow evening at 5 o'clock, and it's going to be quite amazing because they're all over the world. So it's going to be a lot of fun. So community, massively powerful and really, really inspiring what's happening at the moment around shutdown. Then the next one is living in joy. So joy is blue zones, radical remission, positive psychology. When we're in stress, cortisol. When we're in joy, oxytocin. So we got a gland here, the pituitary gland, is where oxytocin gets produced. So when we take our hand and we put it on our heart, small amounts of oxytocin are starting to come into our system. And when we are playing with a puppy or we're giving somebody a hug, essentially oxytocin is that love drug, as they call it, or that love hormone. And it's actually a scientific particle. There's actually and I think it's an elemental like formula for it, for love. And it is this oxytocin. And the more we move and encourage oxytocin in our lives, the more we move from our sympathetic to our parasympathetic. So fight, fright, or freeze, I think I said that right, to rest, digest, and heal. It's really important. And one of the biggest things that I find most challenging is when I'm supporting somebody who's going through the challenge of cancer, is to say, okay, well, what are you going to do for 2 minutes tomorrow that is joyful? And I get that look, again, just going like, what are you talking about? I've got no permission to be joyful. I'm going through like this crazy journey, like everything is hectic. So it's very tough, and society kind of drills it out of us that we have to earn our joy. But I've found it, and the science that supports it is irrefutable. The fact that we have to indulge in ourselves, we have to be self-compassionate around doing the things that bring us life, that bring us optimism, that bring us joy, that bring us like connection. It's really, really, really powerful. And it's really, really, really challenging, especially in moments like these where we are. The next one, and I suppose a challenging one, is releasing suppressed emotions. Now, suppressed emotions, again, this is blue zone, it's radical remission, and it's positive psychology. So trauma undealt with gets stored in the cells in chemicals, in the cortisols and the other 1,600 stress hormones. So when we don't deal with something, essentially the hypothesis is that when we suppress and suppress and suppress and suppress, we can actually create disease around suppressing emotions. If you look at the ancient cultures of like ancient Tibet or old African cultures, the Aborigines or the Chinese that go past 2,500 years, they speak of chi, they speak of prana, and now we speak of energy. And I'm starting to have some really interesting experiences with the Enneagram that are starting to point towards that people with specific emotional blockages are susceptible to specific diseases. So like things like liver is anger. I was suppressing speaking my truth because I'm a 9 Enneagram. So where do I get cancer? Here and here. So if you understand the chakras, that's expression. So it's fascinating, this area. And it's a hard one, especially for South African men, because tears are very cathartic. A good cry every now and again, especially in what we're going through as a globe, or in seeing what other people are going through, and that empathy starting to rise. And allowing ourselves to feel that and allow whatever emotions, whatever physical reaction to happen is very, very powerful. I've got a psychotherapist I've been seeing for 3 years. He is amazing. He's brought me so much peace, insight, celebration into my life. My relationship with him is not just about this pillar. It's about integration. It's about awareness. It's about becoming a better human being. But you can do therapy, you can do, I do dance as well. I used to run TRE or trauma release exercise, EFT, Reiki, transcendental meditation. There's so many different things that allow for us to be able to feel these emotions and allow them the space and let them go. It's not as intimidating as it might be, but it's very, very powerful to be able to let go of that trauma or to process that trauma in some way so that we don't carry on. Then I think this will probably be the last one. So this is the spiritual practice. So this is in Blue Zones, it's radical remission, it's in positive psychology. And as far as radical remission is concerned, spiritual practice has got nothing to do with religion. It's got everything to do with a sacred time that these people have given to themselves in order to connect with themselves, in order to pray, to meditate, to quieten, to watch the sunrise, to stand in awe of stars, to watch a bird. So this is essentially what the radical remission people are speaking into. It's this practice that they keep sacred, that it's the time for them and for connection with themselves, or to connection to other, or something higher than themselves. When it comes to Blue Zones, interesting, 98% of the 5 different communities that were discovered to be Blue Zones were all had some level of spiritual practice in it. But what was interesting is that it was completely irrelevant of what religion or what faith that was. But it was around the community, the practice, and the sacredness of that practice in that community. And that supported that community that then supported those people to anchor into the spirituality that I speak into this pillar. So now down to practical guidance. So everything that I've kind of gone through, and I really hope that it's dropped a couple of seeds. And even if you're not aware, things are going to grow from it. And I really, really value and hope that you're able to get some level of gift from what I've gone into here, and some level of acknowledgement that, wow, it's not as possibly as complicated, or as, I don't have to go to Vipassana and to meditate for 10 days and eat vegetable broth in order to be able to start moving your bodies, your minds, and your emotions into a place of well-being, so become healthier physically. So these are the things that I would recommend myself on what has worked for me. Compassion and gratitude are 2 massive things. Gratitude for me, I started a practice of gratitude a number of years ago. And what I found very challenging the first week I did it. So I wrote down 3 things that I was grateful for every single day for 7 days. And it was a pain in the ass, to be honest. But I kept at it. I was on a 21-day mission. And then I got into week 2 and week 3, and they became neutral. I didn't have like a negative, or didn't feel like effort, didn't feel like a chore. After about a month, it became a joy for me to connect in the morning to go like, oh, what am I grateful for? It was this, it was this, it was this, and with this. And what is fascinating, I found a study subsequent to that to say your brain actually is this is what is amazing about your subconscious brain, because it more often than not, it works against us, getting us into a sympathetic nervous system and getting us fearful. But where we can use it to really support us is that we use gratitude practice, because what happens is our subconscious mind starts to look for things during the day, after I think about 3 weeks, that we can be grateful for. So it's already doing the homework subconsciously and behind the scenes. What happens after like 2 or 3 months is even more powerful. Our subconscious mind starts to influence our conscious mind to actually do things, to activate, to step into action that we can then use for our gratitude diary the next morning. How powerful is that? I mean, it's phenomenal how powerful gratitude is. If I were to start off with, very controversially, give guidance to this COVID-19 or coronavirus, I would say everyone start a gratitude diary and share it. I think compassion is the most important part of what we're going through right now. I feel like we're all going through grief. In everybody that I'm speaking to and myself, I had a real rough day yesterday, a real negative, and I allowed myself to go into that space. And I had compassion when I didn't follow through on certain things that I wanted to achieve. Compassion is the key. It's massive. The next thing I'd like to speak into is knowledge and experience. So I've given you a whole bunch of knowledge here. The key to making it meaningful in life is to create an experience out of it. So the gratitude practice is nothing unless it's done. Changing, like eating a different variety of foods, you're not going to know how your body's reacting to it unless you actually try it. So it's essentially taking, I suppose, a little bit of knowledge and making an experience out of it, which I find is the most important and the most powerful thing that I've ever done in order to take the stuff that I'm spoken about here and actually incorporate it into my life. Then taking time. So radical remission survivors are typically people who have taken 2 years. These are people who have been given a 6-month terminal prognosis. They've taken 2 years to integrate everything that I've spoken to you tonight about. And that is somebody who's facing death's door, as it were. So giving yourselves permission to take years to shift your diet, to take years to bring more compassion, to take years to add more joy, and to become more aware of it, where you're doing it, where you're not doing it. Your mind is so powerful. It starts to learn and engineer those sorts of things. The more that you bring them into your awareness, it's very, very powerful. The next thing is small, tiny steps. What I found that I tried to do, like I've given up alcohol at the end of last year, and I've been trying to give it up for 3 years. I've developed a poor relationship with alcohol, let's say in my 40s or my late 30s and 40s, and I knew I needed to let it go. And it took me 3 years of little steps and then falling off, and then little steps and then falling off, and then little steps and falling off. And now I haven't, after day 95, because I know days, I haven't had any level of craving at all, or even in this lockdown, which I used to use to numb a little bit. So it's those tiny little steps and a long period of time to actually make these changes. This is not something that I recommend people try and change everything. It's not sustainable. And then failing. I fail a hell of a lot. I'm a constant learning progress and and screw up of things. And it's something that has served me in such good stead, being able to build up an okayness with failing, but moving that forward and going, like with me giving up drinking, it took me 3 years of off and on, and then sitting in front of my psychotherapist and going, I've fallen off again. And he's like, it's okay, Brett, what have we learned? What insight have you got now around it? So it's allowing yourself the space to fail and go, it's cool. And the changes are subtle. I found 3 years ago when I started shifting my diet, it was these tiny little changes of like, I'm going to add a little bit more veg to this. I'm going to add a little bit more of this. I'm going to try this fast thing, intermittent fasting. And slowly but surely, 3 years later, I'm 15 kgs lighter. I'm fitter. My digestive system is the best it's ever been in my life. But it's these tiny little changes that build up that compound interest, essentially. And then reflection and awareness. The power of journaling astounds me. It really is something quite phenomenal. And allowing yourself the space to be able to actually take a look at the day and go, how did I serve myself? Did I nourish myself, or did I deplete myself? Like, which one of those owned the day in what areas of my life? And that brings such incredible insights that allow change and shift to happen all on its own. And that is essentially my ingredient list and my experience of fierce compassion.